Listen, I get into discussions, maybe arguments, with people about comic book stuff a lot more frequently than I'd like to admit. But one that seems to crop up on the internet is who could wield Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. And I'm not talking about just people in Marvel, like Captain America. He's done it, we know that. I'm talking about anyone from any universe. So today I'm going to throw out a few characters, honestly, some frankly insane picks of characters in fiction or fictionalized versions of real people that could wield Mjolnir. And I'm going to back it up. Stick around. I'm Dan Unthan, and this is the Doomcast. Alright, first off, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and the bell and make about one of these videos a week. They are all great, so please don't miss even one. I also only talk about stuff that I like. I really don't like talking about stuff that I don't love. And you know what I love doing? Stupid power scaling. Like this. Second, we have to cover criteria. We gotta talk about what lets you wield Mjolnir at all. In the Prime 616 continuity, that's comics, it's not the MCU. MCU is actually Earth 1999-99. For some reason, they refer to it in-universe as 616. They're wrong, not me. Whatever. Anyway, in 616 continuity, Mjolnir was enchanted by Odin so that whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. Meaning that whoever actually tries to lift the hammer, if they're not worthy, they can't move it, and any power that would be granted by the hammer couldn't be used. And that includes Thor. Anyway, what's worthy? I've seen fanon indicating popularly that a person has to be pure of heart, but also a warrior, but also willing to kill. But in fact, until recently, there was no specific criteria codified in comics as to what made somebody actually worthy. It was just you were worthy or you weren't. Moreover, the specific willingness to kill might often have disqualified Thor on more than one occasion in which he could easily have killed Loki, but was unwilling to do so. What's more, it's also canonical that whoever is All-Father, whether it's Odin classically or currently Thor, since Odin is in Valhalla, can merely deem anybody that they wish to be worthy. Deeming people worthy, that's what Odin literally did with Beta Ray Bill. So, what are the actual criteria? The only codification that's ever been defined in Marvel Comics as to what's actually worthy occurs in Immortal Thor number 5 by Ewing, in which the following specific qualities are listed. Wielders of Thor's hammer must possess compassion, restraint, nobility, wisdom, and humility. None of those qualities actually require aggression or willingness to use a weapon with deadly force. And that kind of goes without saying because absolutely anybody picking up a weapon, especially a hammer, with the intention of fighting, already has that. That is not an uncommon quality. A willingness to harm, or a willingness to kill, or being a warrior. However you define that, you need an additional set of criteria as well. An uncommon quality? Those other 5 things. Those aren't common. So if we're talking about compassion, humility, restraint, nobility, and wisdom, that narrows it down. That's also still a lot of people. So who fits the bill? Alright, you want a hot take? Goku. Just kidding. We're talking about any universe. Let's go Lord of the Rings. Samwise Gamgee. Probably more than any other character in Lord of the Rings. He's exemplary of all 5 of those attributes. And honestly, if you're going to use a warrior and he has to have a willingness to kill, the dude took out an entire tower full of orcs on his own in Mordor. He stood up to Shelob. Even when he blew up at Smeagol in a little lack of restraint, it was his wisdom seeing through Smeagol's ruse. Probably more than any other character in Lord of the Rings, Samwise Gamgee could lift Thor's hammer. Easily worthy. Mr. Rogers. Okay, Mr. Rogers is not fictional. Oh? Isn't he? Yeah, Fred Rogers was a real person, but the person that appears on camera is definitely a fictionalized version of Fred Rogers. Hence, not a real person. So, he is a work of fiction. Mr. Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, who taught generations of kids compassion, restraint, nobility, wisdom, and humility, would also be worthy of the same and able to wield Mjolnir to deadly effect if he was required. Next up, Goku. Yeah, this time I'm serious. Honestly, what can't Son Goku do? Pretty much nothing. He's merciful, noble, inspires even his own enemies, including Frieza and Jiren, and Vegeta ultimately at the end. In fact, Vegeta probably by the end of Dragon Ball Super could wield Mjolnir as well. There's no question that those 5 worthy attributes are met by Goku at least. Maybe by Vegeta later on. But if Goku is an absolute bumbling doofus half of the time who isn't interested in fighting anybody but the strongest person, does that still make him worthy? We're talking about a hammer Thor can wield. Oh, but wait, there's more. Wonder Woman not only displays those canonically necessary attributes, I mean, obviously she's DC's Thor, or is Thor DC's Wonder Woman? Anyway, her whole thing is compassionate love, right? And her only weakness is bondage. But she also canonically did wield Mjolnir in Kurt Busiek and George Perez's JLA vs. Avengers, so it's hard to argue against it being a thing since it actually did happen. Now you might be asking, does that mean that Thor is into bondage also? I don't know, true believer. What does your heart say? Anyway, Nightwing is probably, of the whole Bat family, the most restrained. Compassionate, noble, wise, and humble, even if you're counting Batman, to be honest. If I was being real, Batman kind of lacks the necessary humility and restraint. But Dick, definitely all of that, and going toe-to-toe and blow for blow with Deathstroke over the last how many decades, makes him a warrior as well. Sure, maybe those are controversial takes, but if you want a DC deep cut, Plastic Man. Yeah. Former criminal Patrick O'Brien, who was in an accident that granted him incredible plastic powers, and he himself might theoretically be one of the most powerful Justice Leaguers. But his choice to turn himself around after ending up at a monastery after his accident, and his journey from criminal to comical paragon, is definitely one of humility, nobility, and one that's pretty hard to argue against, in my opinion, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Incredible nobility and wisdom, but his compassion is evident even in his interaction with Anakin over and over again. His humility and pretending to just be a mere hermit for decades just to watch over Luke and make sure he's safe. But the incredible power of Mjolnir, wielded by a Force user of Obi-Wan's caliber, would be crazy. And I think it's pretty hard to argue that he couldn't do it. Saitama from One Punch Man is a guy who's just a hero for fun, but actually embodies all of those criteria himself. Is he oblivious? A little, but not entirely. There's still a certain wisdom to him, because while he resolves a lot with his strength, many of his feats have been centered on his wits as well. But despite being overpowered, he's also humble. Beyond his tagline, his workout is definitely not what made him so strong. He's so committed to the flame of compassion within himself that he's willing to sacrifice himself with humility and nobility. And that's rare and an inspiring display even in Demon Slayer. Rengoku would undoubtedly be able to wield Mjolnir. Steve Urkel. Yeah, I'm 100% serious. Steve Urkel could wield Mjolnir. Steve put himself on the line for the Winslow family on more than one occasion. His Stefan personality comes as a result of the scientific experiment that removed a lot of those core qualities, notably humility. Steve is arguably the only primetime TV character from the 90s that probably could wield Mjolnir. And as long as we're continuing to talk TV, I don't think I really have to go into too much detail here, but Optimus Prime would be an easy candidate for being able to wield Mjolnir. He's a paragon devoted to the preservation of life in all forms. Every virtue required to make one worthy of Mjolnir is doubtlessly present in the stalwart Autobot, who inspired every single 80s kid who was obsessed with giant robots. Now, would Convoy or Jinrai be able to? That is another story. Now this might seem like a bit of a stretch given the last character, Optimus Prime, but I think that Komugi from Hunter x Hunter would also be capable of wielding Mjolnir if it came to it. Wisdom, compassion, humility, nobility, and restraint are all impeccably present in this mostly blind Gungi champion, whose games with and eventually love for Meruem probably saved the world from a chimera ant apocalypse. It's hard to argue that those virtues are present. Does that make her worthy? And while we're on the subject of Hunter x Hunter, Killua Zoldyck isn't by any means a perfect character, but he also still possesses the qualities necessary to be worthy by the end of at least the anime. Gon, you might argue, does at some point, but he arguably lacks restraint. Killua eventually learns humility, nobility, compassion, wisdom, and most importantly, that key restraint, a quality that is certainly critical in a trained assassin, even if that's not quite who he ends up. Ironically, the canonical mythological Thor probably would not be worthy of wielding Marvel's version of Thor's Mjolnir. The Eddas portray Thor as a character who is headstrong, brash, ill-tempered, frequently drunk, cruel, sometimes easily fooled, and tends to solve most of his problems by narrowing his eyes and hitting things with a hammer. Not that the Marvel Thor is that far off some of the time, but less Marvel Thor, surprisingly much more Marvel Deadpool than anything. So, no. Actually, Thor couldn't be Thor. Anyway, that's it for this week. Agree, disagree, that's fine. Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll see you again next week. Peace.